A simple HOA dispute? Or a terrifying network of crime? When one military wife refused to back down, she uncovered a chilling secret that stretched far beyond her own neighborhood, risking her career to expose a scam that could. It began with a frantic 911 call, a voice screeching about my wife's refusal to join the neighborhood association. Can you believe it? Someone actually dialed emergency services because we declined HOA membership. The responding officer, a young man named Officer Miller, arrived looking utterly perplexed by the complaint. As he asked for my wife Sarah's identification, our neighbor Brenda stood nearby, a smug grin plastered across her face, clearly convinced she'd won some petty victory. But the moment Officer Miller saw Sarah's credentials, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Brenda's triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by utter shock. What happened next sent ripples of disbelief through our quiet community. Let me introduce you to Victoria Sterling, our HOA president for the last decade. At 54, she carried herself with an air of self-importance, as if her laminated Office Depot badge granted her the authority of a federal judge. She launched into a rehearsed monologue about community standards and property values. But I noticed something peculiar. Every few seconds, her gaze darted back to her house, as if she expected the FBI to burst from her rose bushes. Sarah, ever the perceptive Navy logistics officer, immediately began cataloging these odd behaviors in her mind. Me, I was just trying to stifle my laughter at the absurd theatrical production unfolding on our front lawn. It felt like a community theater play that had gone terribly, terribly wrong. Now, here's where the legal intricacies and Victoria's cunning became clear. Our property technically fell within the HOA's boundaries, that much was true. But here's the crucial detail. The previous owner had passed away before signing the updated 2019 covenant, a document riddled with ridiculous new rules no one had voted on. So we existed in this strange legal limbo, technically part of the HOA, yet unbound by Victoria's latest power-hungry regulations, concocted, I'm sure, during a wine-fueled weekend of suburban tyranny. Victoria, believing herself a legal savant, decided to exploit this ambiguity. State law requires HOA compliance, she declared, brandishing papers that looked freshly printed. Daily $100 fines until you sign the updated covenant. The sheer audacity. Who in their right mind demands strangers sign legal documents just because they said so? Then, she started spouting municipal code T42D as if reading from an official government handbook. Spoiler alert. That code was a complete fabrication. She'd made it up on the spot, probably assuming military families were too naive to fact-check suburban legal nonsense. But Victoria didn't know Sarah. My wife Sarah has navigated actual military bureaucracy, the kind that makes civilian red tape seem like child's play. She's conquered Navy logistics nightmares that would send most people into a fetal position. She possesses federal contractor clearance, demanding more background checks than most people undergo in a lifetime. So when some suburban wannabe dictator showed up with fake legal threats and invented municipal codes, Sarah's military training ignited faster than you can say court-martial. Instead of telling Victoria exactly where she could shove her clipboard, which believe me I desperately wanted to do, Sarah simply smiled, that unnerving military politeness that signals professional annihilation. I'll need to review the actual legal requirements first, she stated in that calm, measured tone she uses to systematically dismantle an opponent's argument. Could you provide the specific statute citations and the legal authority for these daily fines? Watching Victoria's confident facade crumble in real time was like witnessing someone bring a water pistol to a gunfight with a Navy SEAL. But Victoria wasn't ready to relinquish her imaginary authority. Oh no, this woman doubled down harder than a high-stakes gambler facing foreclosure. Exactly 63 minutes after our conversation, Sarah timed it, a hand-delivered violation notice appeared on our doorstep. The offense? Unauthorized vehicle display for having military license plates on our car. I'm not exaggerating. She issued us a ticket for government-issued plates on a vehicle legally parked in our own driveway. The notice was a masterpiece of bureaucratic fiction, citing the non-existent municipal code, claiming we violated community aesthetic standards, and demanding immediate compliance. Sarah meticulously photographed and time-stamped everything, building what she called her documentation trail. Meanwhile, I was thinking, let's just sign the stupid covenant and avoid the drama. Thank goodness I married someone infinitely smarter than me. Sarah recognized it for what it was, a calculated intimidation campaign designed to crush anyone who dared question Victoria's self-appointed reign. That evening our neighbor Eleanor Vance, a 70-something retired accountant with more common sense than the rest of the subdivision combined, came over with coffee and startling insight. She's never been this aggressive before, Eleanor confided, settling into our kitchen chairs as if about to reveal state secrets. Something's got her spooked. In all my years here, I've never seen Victoria this desperate to force someone out. When we asked what she meant, Eleanor's expression darkened like storm clouds before a tornado. 3 families in the past 2 years, she whispered. All of them asked questions about HOA finances. All of them suddenly decided to move after dealing with Victoria's harassment campaign. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a power-hungry suburbanite having a bad week. This was systematic. This was calculated. This was someone who had perfected the art of using fabricated authority to terrorize people into silence. And we had just become her latest target. But here's what Victoria hadn't factored in. Military families don't easily scare, and we absolutely do not back down from bullies who believe paperwork grants them invincibility. The next morning brought an escalation I couldn't ignore. Victoria cornered Sarah at the mailbox, delivering what she clearly thought was her most intimidating performance. I've been running this community for 10 years, she declared, her voice rising like a boiling kettle. I've destroyed families who thought they could cross me. You military people always think rules don't apply to you, but this community has ways of handling non-compliance. The threat was direct, chilling, and utterly the wrong thing to say to someone who'd spent years facing actual dangerous situations overseas. Sarah, maintaining that infuriating military calm that fills me with both pride and a healthy dose of fear, simply replied, "Ma'am, I've faced actual threats overseas. Your paperwork doesn't intimidate me." That's when my protective husband instincts kicked in. Watching someone threaten my wife tends to bring out my less diplomatic side. Try threatening her again, I warned Victoria, probably with more heat than Sarah would have preferred, and see what happened. The look on Victoria's face was priceless, as if she'd just realized she'd been barking at a sleeping bear. But then, things took a turn that should have been our first real warning that we were dealing with someone far more dangerous than your average HOA tyrant. Instead of retreating or trying to de-escalate, Victoria immediately pulled out her phone and dialed 911 right there in front of us. "Emergency," we heard her wail, her voice instantly adopting a victim tone worthy of an Academy Award if it weren't so patently false. "I need the police immediately. The military family is making threats and harassment. They're being aggressive and intimidating." The whole performance was so over the top I almost applauded, but as I watched her through our window afterward, something didn't compute. Why was she smiling while reporting a threat? That moment, seeing her genuine satisfaction while making a false police report, was when we both realized this neighborhood drama was about to get much, much worse. The next morning, I was at our kitchen table, trying to convince myself that Victoria's police call was just empty bluster. When I looked out the window and saw a squad car pulling into our driveway, my stomach plummeted faster than a rock off a cliff. For military families, even false police reports can devastate a career. Security clearances, federal contractor positions, Navy logistics assignments, they all vanish the moment you're flagged as a problem person in some police database. Sarah maintained her professional composure, but I could see the worry etched around her eyes. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was potentially career-ending, something that could haunt us for decades. Officer Miller emerged from his cruiser with that serious cop expression that instantly signals a non-social visit. All business, clipboard ready, the kind of demeanor that makes you mentally review every action of the past week. Meanwhile, Victoria had positioned herself at her front window, like she was watching her personal victory parade. I could practically see her vibrating with anticipation from across the yard, probably already rehearsing her "I told you so" speech for the neighbors. Officer Miller approached our door with textbook professionalism, asking the usual questions about reported threats and harassment. But Victoria couldn't resist her first tactical blunder, trying to control the narrative from her yard. "They think military service makes them special," she shrieked across the distance, her voice carrying that suburban shrillness that makes dogs howl. "They're trying to intimidate the entire community with their federal connections." Every 30 seconds it was a new interruption. "Officer, I'm the HOA president. They're violating community standards. This is exactly the aggressive behavior I warned you about." Her voice grew higher and more frantic with each outburst, like a balloon inflating to the point of bursting. Officer Miller, to his credit, maintained professional courtesy, while visibly growing annoyed by Victoria's attempts to micromanage his investigation. You could see that look cops get when civilians try to tell them how to do their jobs. Polite on the surface, but mentally noting who was reasonable and who was hysterical. When Officer Miller requested identification for his report, Sarah calmly provided her driver's license and federal contractor ID, without drama or resistance. But then she did something that completely transformed the situation. She handed him her concealed carry permit, not just any permit, but one with a LEOSA endorsement. For those unfamiliar, LEOSA, the Law Enforcement Officer Safety Act, grants qualified federal law enforcement personnel the right to carry concealed weapons across state lines. It's not an online application. It requires serious federal credentials and ongoing law enforcement status. Officer Miller looked at the permit, then at Sarah, and I watched his entire demeanor shift instantly, as if a switch had been flipped. "Ma'am," he said, his tone immediately respectful, "I didn't realize you held federal law enforcement status." This wasn't some dramatic movie salute. It was simple professional courtesy between law enforcement officers. He began addressing Sarah with the appropriate respect due to her credentials, inquiring about her federal contracting work, and genuinely thanking her for her service to the country. The change in Officer Miller's tone was immediate and undeniable, and Victoria's reaction was absolutely priceless. Her confident expression morphed from smug satisfaction to utter bewilderment, faster than you could utter federal authority. "What?" she shrieked from her yard, her voice cracking. "She's just a neighbor. What authority does she have?" But Officer Miller continued his professional conversation with Sarah, treating Victoria's interruptions like background noise from an irritating car alarm. Watching Victoria's imaginary authority crumble in real time was honestly one of the most satisfying things I've ever witnessed. Her precious clipboard, that symbol of her fabricated power, slipped from her trembling hands, scattering papers across her perfectly manicured lawn like confetti at the world's most pathetic parade. She actually got down on her hands and knees, in full view of the entire neighborhood, scrambling to collect her official-looking documents, while Officer Miller continued to show Sarah the professional courtesy she truly deserved. "But I'm the HOA president," Victoria kept repeating, her voice climbing toward full hysteria like a siren reaching peak volume. "This is my community. I have authority here." Eleanor Vance, drawn by the commotion, had emerged with her morning coffee to witness this spectacular meltdown. Other neighbors, sensing drama like sharks detecting blood, began to appear from their homes. The entire scene was transforming into the kind of neighborhood spectacle people would discuss for years. Officer Miller's investigation was thorough and professional. He meticulously reviewed Sarah's systematic documentation, timestamps, photographs, copies of those bogus violation notices, contrasting them against Victoria's increasingly emotional and contradictory claims. The disparity was stark. Sarah had evidence, calm professionalism; Victoria had hysteria, interruptions, and a clearly fabricated victim narrative. When Officer Miller examined the alleged municipal code violations Victoria had cited, he found no such regulations in the county database. "Ma'am," he told Victoria, with growing skepticism, and that particular cop tone that signals an impending reality check, "filing false police reports is a serious offense. Are you certain about these threat allegations?" The warning was unmistakable. Even Victoria seemed to grasp that she had catastrophically overplayed her hand. Her entire power fantasy was dissolving faster than a house of cards in a hurricane, and she was finally comprehending that her fake authority meant absolutely nothing to actual law enforcement. As Officer Miller concluded his investigation, the entire community dynamic shifted before our eyes. Neighbors who had previously avoided us now approached with curiosity and genuine respect. Eleanor Vance properly introduced herself, mentioning long-standing issues with HOA financial management that no one had dared discuss. The young couple 3 houses down actually apologized for not standing up to Victoria's past harassment campaigns against other families. Even the teenagers on their bikes looked at Sarah with something akin to awe. Officer Miller's final assessment was delivered with professional courtesy, but unmistakable clarity. "This appears to be a civil HOA matter requiring proper legal channels," he told both parties, though his tone to Victoria carried a distinct warning not to waste his time again. I strongly advise resolving disputes through appropriate procedures rather than emergency services. The message was crystal clear. Don't call the police with manufactured drama and expect them to be your personal enforcement squad. As Officer Miller drove away, Victoria's public humiliation was absolute. Every neighbor had witnessed her authority dismissed by actual law enforcement, while Sarah received the professional respect her federal credentials commanded. The woman who had terrorized our community with fake violations and imaginary threats had been exposed as a fraud to everyone she'd tried to intimidate. That evening over dinner, Sarah confessed something that surprised me. I was genuinely terrified this morning, she admitted. Not of Victoria, but of what a police complaint could do to my security clearance. It was a sobering reminder that even when you're completely in the right, the system can still hurt you if you're not careful. But we had dodged that bullet, and now we had something more valuable than mere vindication. Officer Miller's professional assessment that Victoria's complaints were pure nonsense. The tables had completely turned, and Victoria knew it. But that night, Sarah noticed something that sent chills down both our spines. At 2:00 in the morning, Victoria was in her backyard, burning papers in a small metal trash can. Sarah tried to get a better view from our upstairs window, but as she watched, Victoria suddenly stopped and stared directly at Sarah's window. How did she know Sarah was watching? The morning after that chilling 2 a.m. staring contest, I was convinced we were dealing with someone who'd either watched too many spy movies or was hiding something seriously illegal. But Sarah's meticulous mind was working overtime, connecting dots I hadn't even noticed. "David," she said over breakfast, stirring her coffee with that focused expression she gets when solving complex logistics problems. "Normal people don't burn documents at 2 in the morning unless they're hiding something major, and they certainly don't have the situational awareness to spot surveillance unless they're genuinely paranoid about being watched." That's when she decided to do what she does best: follow the money trail. Under California HOA law, specifically Civil Code 5200, which Sarah had of course already looked up, community members have an absolute legal right to inspect financial records. It's not a favor, it's a right. So Sarah submitted a formal written request for financial statements, meeting minutes, and vendor contracts. Nothing aggressive, nothing confrontational, just a straightforward exercise of her legal rights as a dues-paying community member. Victoria's response was, well, more revealing than any financial document could have been. Instead of providing the documents within the required 15-day legal time frame, Victoria claimed they were being reviewed by our accountant, but couldn't provide the accountant's name, firm, or any timeline. When Sarah politely asked for basic contact information, Victoria grew defensive faster than a cornered animal. "These documents contain confidential community information that requires careful review," she stated, using that fake official tone people adopt when fabricating excuses. Folks, red flags don't get much redder than that. Eleanor Vance became our unofficial neighborhood intelligence officer, and let me tell you, never underestimate a retired accountant with time on her hands and a natural suspicion of financial irregularities. She arrived with her phone full of photos that painted a disturbing picture of systematic neglect and broken promises. 3 years ago, they collected $8,000 in special assessments to repair the community playground, she explained, scrolling through identical before and after photos. "Look at this equipment. It's still broken, still dangerous, still exactly the same as when they collected our money." But that wasn't the worst part. Eleanor had been informally tracking HOA dues increases, because as she put it, when you're on a fixed income you notice when your bills keep going up. The numbers were staggering, a 35% increase over 3 years, yet the common areas looked worse than when she'd moved in 5 years ago. "Where did that money go?" she demanded. Honestly, it was a question that should have been asked a long time ago. "The landscaping is dying. The mailboxes are falling apart. And don't even get me started on the state of our community entrance." Sarah's investigative skills, honed by years of tracking military logistics and federal contractor budgets, began uncovering patterns that would make a forensic accountant proud. Vendor contracts showed regular payments to something called Sunshine Maintenance LLC, $72,000 over 36 months for various community improvements that clearly hadn't occurred. When Sarah checked business registration databases, she found absolutely nothing. No business license, no physical address, no legitimate corporate structure, no employee records,
Just a shell company receiving regular electronic transfers from our HOA account, like clockwork. Wire fraud, Sarah murmured, scrolling through bank routing information with that intense focus she gets when tracking discrepancies. Electronic transfers across state lines to a fake business entity. That's automatic federal jurisdiction. She was building a case that would make prosecutors salivate, but I could see the wheels turning in her head about something larger than just our neighborhood drama. This level of systematic fraud suggested someone with experience, someone who had done this before, and refined their method. Meanwhile, Victoria's behavior grew increasingly erratic, making us genuinely nervous about her next move. Anonymous threatening letters began appearing in our mailbox with messages like military families bring unwanted federal scrutiny to peaceful communities, and some people learn to mind their own business the hard way. Nothing directly traceable to her, but the timing was suspiciously coincidental. She even hired a bargain basement lawyer with remaining HOA funds to send us a cease and desist letter about harassment of community leadership. The lawyer's letterhead looked like something printed at a 24-hour copy shop, which told us everything we needed to know about Victoria's legal strategy and budget. But then we got a breakthrough that changed everything. Sarah found a manila envelope slipped under our door one morning, containing bank statements and a handwritten note that chilled us to the bone. She's not the only one. Check Highland Oaks. The documents inside revealed a clear pattern. Monthly transfers from our HOA maintenance account to Premium Care Manor, a memory care facility about 20 miles away. The amounts perfectly matched the missing Sunshine maintenance payments, down to the penny. Someone was trying to help us understand Victoria's motivation, but the implications were staggering. This wasn't just petty theft or power-hungry corruption. This was a desperate daughter, systematically stealing from her neighbors to keep her mother in specialized dementia care that cost $6,000 per month. Don't misunderstand. I'm not excusing criminal behavior, but suddenly her frantic desperation made horrible, heartbreaking sense. She was choosing between her mother's life and her neighbor's trust, and she decided keeping her mother alive was worth destroying her community. Sarah's military precision was building what prosecutors would later call one of the most thorough fraud cases they'd ever seen from a civilian complainant. She documented every fake violation, every threatening letter, every suspicious financial transfer, with timestamps, photographs, and systematic organization that would impress federal investigators. The wire fraud evidence alone was enough to trigger a full-scale federal investigation. Electronic transfers to fictitious businesses, across state lines, systematic embezzlement from a federally regulated community association, and mail fraud through fake invoices. This isn't neighborhood drama anymore, Sarah told me, organizing evidence files with the methodical approach that made her so good at her federal contractor job. This is organized crime with a $72,000 paper trail and enough federal violations to put someone in prison for decades. But even as she spoke, I could see the conflict in her eye. Exposing Victoria meant destroying not just a criminal, but a desperate woman trying to care for her dying mother. When Sarah finally confronted Victoria at the mailbox with her preliminary findings, the reaction was immediate and terrifying. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," Victoria hissed, her carefully maintained facade cracking to reveal raw desperation. "My mother will die if I can't pay for her care. You think you're some kind of hero, but you're destroying an innocent woman's life." The raw pain in her voice was heartbreaking, but it was also a confession confirming everything Sarah had discovered. Yet Victoria's admission about her mother raised questions that kept us both awake that night. If she'd been successfully embezzling for 3 years unnoticed, why target us so aggressively? Why not just ignore the new neighbors and continue her quiet theft? Unless she knew something was about to expose her anyway, and we'd simply arrived at the worst possible time. The next morning brought our answer in a way that was both enlightening and deeply disturbing.
Sarah found another manila envelope slipped under our door with more bank statements and a note that made everything click into place. She's not the only one. Check Highland Oaks HOA. But who left this? And how did they know about Sarah's investigation? The documents revealed the same pattern of wire transfers to shell companies, the same systematic embezzlement techniques, the same desperate attempts to fund family medical care. We weren't dealing with one rogue HOA president having a breakdown. We were looking at what appeared to be a coordinated financial fraud operation spanning multiple communities. And somehow someone wanted us to discover the entire network. 3 days after Sarah's mailbox confrontation with Victoria, About the missing $72,000, our neighborhood drama took a turn even my cynical mind didn't see coming. I woke up Tuesday morning to find "Military Go Home" spray painted across Sarah's car windshield in sloppy red letters, along with a note tucked under the wiper that read "Concerned neighbors" in suspiciously familiar handwriting. My first instinct was pure white-hot rage. I wanted to march to Victoria's house and have a very direct conversation about property damage and intimidation tactics, probably involving some colorful military vocabulary. But Sarah, ever the strategic thinker who sees 3 moves ahead while I'm still processing move 1, grabbed my arm. "David, look at this handwriting," she said, holding the threatening note next to one of Victoria's violation letters. Same slant, same letter formation, same pen pressure. This is definitely from our HOA president. The evidence was right there in red spray paint and blue ink. But what we didn't know then was just how desperate and foolish Victoria had become in her attempts to drive us away. What we later discovered through police investigation was that Victoria had reached peak desperation the night before our car was vandalized. Premium Care Manor had issued a 48-hour eviction notice for her mother due to $18,000 in unpaid bills. Facing the immediate loss of her mother's specialized dementia care, Victoria made a decision that would ultimately destroy not just her freedom, but any remaining shred of sympathy. Instead of vandalizing our car herself, which even she realized would be too obvious, she recruited 16-year-old Kevin from down the street. Young Kevin, probably thinking this was easy money for a harmless prank, was offered $50 cash for what Victoria described as teaching the military family a lesson about community respect. The kid had no idea he was being recruited into a federal crime by a desperate woman already facing wire fraud charges. Victoria convinced him that military families thought they were better than everyone else and needed to be knocked down a peg through some harmless vandalism. Kevin carried out his 2 a.m. mission with all the stealth of a drunk elephant in a china shop. What he didn't know, what Victoria had somehow failed to research despite her paranoid behavior, was that Eleanor Vance had a hardwired security camera system installed after a break-in scare 2 years earlier. Not Wi-Fi cameras that could be jammed, but old-school wired surveillance that recorded everything directly to a digital storage system in her basement, with more backup redundancy than most corporate security systems. Every step of Kevin's amateur vandalism was captured in high-definition color, a documentary filmmaker's dream. There he was, spray paint in hand, constantly looking over his shoulder as if expecting police to jump from every bush. There was the note placement, the evidence staging, even a crystal-clear shot of him checking his phone, presumably for last-minute instructions from his employer. Eleanor called us over that morning, barely containing her excitement, like a detective who'd just solved the crime of the century. "You absolutely need to see this," she exclaimed, leading us to her basement where multiple monitors displayed security footage from different angles. "I've got everything. The whole thing is recorded from start to finish." But the footage that truly made our jaws drop came from her second camera angle, revealing something that transformed this from simple vandalism into a conspiracy. At 2:15 a.m., roughly 10 minutes after Kevin finished his artistic masterpiece, a figure appeared at the edge of the camera's range. It was Victoria, dressed in dark clothing, checking Kevin's work and apparently giving him final instructions. The camera captured her handing him something, presumably his $50 payment, and then both disappearing in different directions, as if they'd rehearsed the entire operation. We had clear, undeniable evidence of conspiracy to commit vandalism, and Kevin was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between pranks and federal crimes. Officer Miller, yes, 2 Millers in this story, just like real life, arrived within an hour, his professional demeanor signaling he was taking this seriously. Confronted with video proof of his late-night activities, 16-year-old Kevin lasted approximately 3 minutes before completely breaking down. "Mrs. Sterling said it was just a prank," he sobbed to his parents and Officer Miller. "She said military families think they're better than everyone and needed to be taught a lesson. She paid me $50 and said nothing bad would happen." The text message evidence on Kevin's phone was absolutely devastating to any defense. Victoria might have tried to mount clear instructions about timing, location, what to write and how to stage the evidence. It was all there in digital black and white. Most damning was a message sent at 1:45 a.m. "Make sure the note looks authentic. We need them to think it's from angry neighbors." This wasn't spontaneous teenage rebellion. This was a carefully coordinated conspiracy with a paper trail even a first-year law student could follow to conviction. Kevin's confession to Officer Miller included details about previous jobs Victoria had hired him for, including delivering mysterious packages to other neighborhoods and taking photos of specific houses for reasons he'd never understood. The scope of Victoria's activities was becoming alarmingly clear. She'd been running some kind of operation far beyond our little subdivision, and our teenage vandal was just the latest recruit in what was apparently a systematic campaign of neighborhood intimidation. The community's reaction was swift and utterly brutal for Victoria's remaining reputation. Eleanor, bless her heart, had shared the security footage in our neighborhood chat group before we could even ask her to be discreet. Within hours, every single household in our subdivision had seen clear, high-definition evidence of their HOA president hiring teenagers to commit crimes against military families. The same neighbors who had been too afraid to challenge Victoria's authority were now posting comments expressing shock, disgust, and demands for her immediate resignation. But the most telling reaction came from Victoria herself, and it was honestly more disturbing than anything she'd done so far. When Kevin and his parents went to her house to confess his involvement and apologize, expecting her to take responsibility, she denied everything with a righteous indignation that would have been impressive if it wasn't so obviously false. Standing on her front porch in broad daylight, with half the neighborhood watching, she told Kevin's parents their son was obviously lying to avoid consequences for his own criminal behavior. "I would never engage in such activity," she declared with theatrical outrage that belonged on a soap opera stage. "Your son is clearly trying to shift blame for his own poor choices onto a respected community leader." The audacity was breathtaking. Here was someone caught red-handed on security footage, with text message evidence and a teenager's detailed confession, and she was still trying to maintain her victim narrative while throwing a 16-year-old under the bus. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was standing room only, the first time in years community members had shown up in significant numbers to challenge Victoria's leadership. One by one, neighbors stood up to share their own stories of harassment, intimidation, and suspicious financial practices they'd been too afraid to discuss. The maintenance worker testified about being told to inflate invoices. The former treasurer admitted being pressured into resigning after questioning expense reports. Even families who'd moved away sent written statements about Victoria's systematic abuse of power, painting a picture of years of corruption. When the vote came to remove Victoria from her position as HOA president, it was unanimous. 37 households voting for her immediate removal, with only one abstention from a family out of town. But Victoria's response to this complete community rejection was perhaps the most disturbing thing we'd witnessed. Instead of anger, instead of shame, instead of any normal human emotion you'd expect from someone whose criminal behavior had just been exposed, Victoria smiled. Not a bitter smile, not a sarcastic one, but a genuinely pleased expression that sent chills down every spine in that room. What did she know that the rest of them did? The morning after Victoria's removal from the HOA presidency brought a sight that will be etched into my memory forever. 2 black SUVs with federal license plates parked outside our subdivision entrance, and agents in those unmistakable FBI windbreakers walking purposefully through our neighborhood as if they owned the place. Eleanor had been absolutely right to suspect something bigger. This wasn't just our local HOA drama anymore. This was a federal investigation that had been building for months, and our quiet suburban community had just become a crucial piece in their puzzle. Agent Davies from the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit approached our house with a professional demeanor that instantly conveyed seriousness. "Miss Sarah," he said, showing his credentials with practiced efficiency, "your complaint about wire fraud is connected to several ongoing investigations we've been conducting. We've been tracking a network of HOA embezzlement schemes across 3 counties, and your documentation is honestly some of the best evidence we've seen." Apparently, Sarah's military precision in building her case had provided exactly the systematic proof federal prosecutors needed to make charges stick in court. The execution of the search warrant at Victoria's house was a neighborhood spectacle that drew every resident to their windows and front yards as if watching the season finale of a favorite crime drama. FBI agents spent 6 hours systematically cataloging evidence: computers, phones, financial documents, even boxes of papers Victoria had apparently stored in her garage like a criminal archivist. The irony wasn't lost on me that someone so paranoid about destroying evidence had kept such detailed records of her own crimes. "Criminals always think they're smarter than they actually are," Agent Davies explained.
She documented everything because she wanted to track exactly how much she was stealing and from where. But the real shock came when Agent Davies shared the scope of what they'd discovered through months of parallel investigation. Highland Oaks HOA, mentioned in our anonymous tip, was indeed part of the same criminal network. So were Meadowbrook Estates and Riverside Commons. 4 different communities, 4 different HOA presidents, all using the exact same shell company structure to embezzle maintenance funds with military precision. The total stolen amount wasn't just our $72,000. It was over $300,000 across multiple jurisdictions spanning 3 counties. The family connection, Agent Davies revealed, made everything click into place in the most disturbing way imaginable. Victoria's sister, Margaret Sterling, was the HOA president at Highland Oaks, where identical wire fraud had been occurring for 2 years using the same fake vendor system. Their cousin managed the financial books at Meadowbrook Estates, handling the money transfers and shell company management. What we'd assumed was one desperate woman stealing for her mother's dementia care was actually an organized family business, systematically defrauding suburban communities. The anonymous tips, the mysterious evidence deliveries, the way Victoria seemed to anticipate our investigation, everything connected to a criminal network far larger and more sophisticated than any of us had imagined in our worst nightmare. Your neighborhood wasn't randomly targeted, Agent Davies explained. You were specifically chosen because your wife's federal contractor background made you likely to notice financial irregularities. They were testing their methods against professional scrutiny. Victoria's arrest, when it finally came, felt almost anticlimactic after everything we'd endured. She answered the door at 6:07 a.m. in her bathrobe, looking like someone who had been expecting this exact moment for weeks, mentally prepared for federal custody. No dramatic resistance, no tearful breakdown, no last-minute attempts to flee or destroy evidence, just resigned acceptance as federal agents read her rights and walked her to their unmarked vehicle, like it was just another Tuesday morning appointment. The only emotion she showed was when Agent Davies mentioned her mother's care facility. She'll be taken care of, Victoria said quietly, her voice a strange mixture of relief and sadness. That was always the plan. Even facing federal charges that could mean decades in prison, her primary concern remained her mother's well-being, a concern tragically twisted by the criminal methods she'd used to fund that care. Eleanor Vance had one more crucial piece of information that explained Victoria's bizarre behavior, her strange satisfaction at being voted out of the HOA presidency. I saw her loading suitcases at 3 a.m. 2 nights ago, she told Agent Davies during his interview. But her car never moved from the driveway and I watched until sunrise. The FBI discovered that Victoria's sister Margaret had been planning to pick her up for what they called the exit strategy, fleeing to Margaret's remote cabin in Oregon while federal heat died down. The suitcases, Eleanor observed, contained cash, backup identification documents, prepaid cell phones, and enough supplies for an extended disappearance from civilization. Margaret had coordinated escape plans for the entire family network, with specific protocols for who would flee when law enforcement finally caught up. But Victoria's car was still in the driveway, so where was she planning to go? The answer revealed just how sophisticated this criminal enterprise had become. The cooperation deal Victoria ultimately accepted revealed the true scope of what we'd accidentally stumbled into by simply asking for HOA financial records. This wasn't just 4 HOA communities systematically robbed by family members. This was a carefully researched approach to targeting suburban associations with weak financial oversight and aging volunteer leadership. The Sterling family had spent years perfecting a method of infiltrating HOA boards, establishing fake vendor relationships, and systematically draining maintenance funds while appearing to be model community leaders. Agent Davies pulled Sarah aside during an evidence review session to share something that sent chills down both our spines, making us realize how deep this rabbit hole went. Your case opened something much bigger than we initially realized, he said, his expression serious, like federal agents get when sharing classified information. We need to talk about Highland Oaks HOA and what we found there, and we especially need to discuss Victoria's sister Margaret. Her sister? What did family have to do with federal wire fraud? The answer, it turned out, was everything. Margaret Sterling had been the mastermind, coordinating the entire network from her position as HOA president in Highland Oaks. She used family connections and shared financial resources to expand their criminal enterprise across multiple counties. She'd been feeding Victoria real-time information about our investigation, leveraging her network of compromised HOA officials to monitor federal inquiry patterns and stay ahead of surveillance. Our neighborhood hadn't been randomly targeted, We've been carefully selected as a test case to see if their methods could survive investigation by someone with Sarah's federal contractor background and military training. The cooperation agreement, which reduced Victoria's potential sentence from 20 years to something more manageable, required complete disclosure about family assets, criminal methods, and future targets the network had been researching for potential expansion. Federal investigators learned that the Sterling family had been preparing to scale their operation to larger communities with more sophisticated financial oversight, using lessons learned from our neighborhood to refine their techniques for operating under professional scrutiny and against federal contractor family. But the most chilling revelation came during Victoria's final debriefing. Our neighborhood had been deliberately chosen as a test case to see if their methods could withstand investigation by someone with Sarah's federal contractor background and military training. The federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was intimidating. Even without knowing, our neighborhood drama had escalated into a case that would be referenced in white-collar crime textbooks for years. Sarah and I sat in the gallery, watching Victoria face Judge Harrison for sentence. I'll be honest, despite everything she put us through, seeing someone's life utterly destroyed is never easy, even when they deserve it. The woman who had terrorized our community with fake authority looked small and defeated in her orange federal jumpsuit, a deflated balloon once filled with hot air and self-importance. Prosecutor Anderson laid out the full scope of Victoria's crimes with methodical precision, reminding me why federal prosecutors have such terrifyingly high conviction rates. The defendants systematically stole $72,000 from her own neighbors to fund personal expenses, he announced. She created fictitious business entities to hide wire fraud across state lines and conspired with family members to expand this criminal enterprise across multiple communities. Each charge carried years of potential prison time, and the evidence was so overwhelming Victoria's defense attorney could only argue for mercy based on her mother's medical needs and family circumstance. Judge Harrison's response was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd heard every sob story. "Miss Sterling," he said, looking directly at Victoria with an authoritative presence that makes federal judges genuinely terrifying, "you held a position of trust in your community. You used that trust to systematically steal from families who considered you their neighbor and their leader. The court finds no acceptable justification for organized theft, regardless of personal financial pressures or family medical needs. 30 months federal incarceration, plus full restitution, $72,000 to be paid back to the HOA with interest and penalties." But here's what made this sentencing different. Victoria's victim impact statement was perhaps the most honest thing she'd said throughout the ordeal. "I wanted to give my mother the best possible care during her final years," she said, her voice breaking slightly but maintaining eye contact with the judge. "But I chose the wrong way to do it, and I hurt innocent people who trusted me with their community's financial well-being. I'm sorry for betraying that trust." There was no drama, no last-minute revelations, no attempts to shift blame, just a broken woman accepting responsibility for choices that had destroyed her life and hurt everyone around her. The immediate consequences for Victoria's family were devastating, extending far beyond her prison sentence. Her mother was immediately transferred from Premium Care Manor to a state Medicaid facility, providing basic memory care, but none of the specialized services that costs. Victoria's house was seized by federal marshals to pay restitution, forcing her elderly mother to move in with distant relatives ill-equipped to handle advanced dementia care. The grandchildren faced the social stigma of having a convicted felon grandmother whose crimes had been extensively covered in local media, affecting everything from school relationships to college applications. Meanwhile, our community began the slow, careful process of rebuilding trust and financial stability after 3 years of systematic theft. Eleanor Vance was unanimously elected permanent HOA president, bringing her accounting background and natural skepticism to establish transparent financial oversight that would prevent future fraud. New bylaws required monthly financial reports available to all residents, independent annual auditing by certified accountants, and member approval for any expenditure over. The playground promised 3 years earlier was finally repaired using recovered funds. Her commanding officer commended her civilian leadership in systematic evidence gathering, noting her actions directly supported a significant federal investigation leading to multiple arrests. The Defense Security Service upgraded her security clearance based on her proper handling of a criminal matter that could have affected her federal contractor status. "Sometimes doing the right thing professionally benefits you personally," Sarah told me. But the story that emerged during Victoria's cooperation was far more disturbing. The Sterling family fraud network had operated for over 5 years, specifically targeting HOA communities because volunteer leadership made oversight weak. They'd stolen from dozens of families across 4 counties, using identical shell company structures and embezzlement techniques refined through years of successful operation. The cooperation agreement, which reduced Victoria's sentence, required complete disclosure about family assets, criminal methods, and future targets the network had researched for expansion across the Southwest. Federal investigators learned the Sterling family had been preparing to scale their operation to larger communities with more sophisticated financial oversight, using lessons learned from our neighborhood to refine techniques for operating under professional scrutiny and against federal contractor families. During the plea hearing, Agent Davies pulled Sarah aside. "Your case opens something much bigger than we initially realized. We need to talk about Highland Oaks HOA and what we discovered there, and especially Victoria's sister Margaret, and her role in coordinating this entire operation." Her sister, what did family have to do with federal wire fraud? The answer revealed Margaret Sterling had been the actual mastermind, coordinating the entire criminal network from her position as HOA president in Highland Oaks. She'd fed Victoria real-time information, using her network of compromised HOA officials to monitor federal inquiry patterns and stay ahead of surveillance. Our neighborhood hadn't been randomly targeted. We'd been carefully selected as a test case for whether their methods could survive investigation by someone with Sarah's federal background. The most chilling discovery: Margaret had maintained detailed profiles of over 200 HOA communities across 6 states, complete with financial analysis, leadership vulnerabilities, and operational timeline. The Sterling family wasn't just running a regional embezzlement scheme. They developed a systematic approach for nationwide expansion of suburban community fraud, treating HOA theft like a legitimate business with market research and growth strategy. The final twist in Victoria's cooperation: she revealed the identity of our anonymous tip provider, her own nephew Alex, who'd grown uncomfortable with the family's criminal activities. His conscience ultimately brought down the entire operation, but the scope of what they'd planned was staggering. Federal investigators found evidence of expansion plans that could have victimized thousands of families across the entire southwestern United States. As we left the federal courthouse after Victoria's sentencing, Sarah and I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and genuine sadness. Justice had been served, our community was healing, and a major criminal network exposed. But seeing someone's life destroyed, even someone who made terrible choices, reminded us that real-world consequences are messier and more painful than movie resolutions. 18 months later, our neighborhood had transformed. The fear and intimidation under Victoria's reign had been replaced by genuine cooperation. Property values increased 8% as word spread about our transparent financial oversight. Families stayed, and new residents chose us for our accountability. Eleanor Vance proved the perfect leader, her expertise establishing clear monthly reports and independent audits. Quarterly meetings, once sparsely attended, were now standing room only. Sarah's professional reputation soared. Her documentation became a case study for federal contractor training, illustrating how military personnel can navigate civilian criminal matters while maintaining security clearance. She was promoted to senior logistics coordinator, advising other military families. The healing wasn't without challenges. Some residents were uncomfortable with the federal attention. A few moved due to media coverage, and financial recovery was only partial. Trust rebuilding took time, but conflicts were now resolved through open communication and compromise. The annual barbecue became a true celebration of resilience. Captain Hayes's family moved in, reflecting Sarah's vision of military integration, their children enjoying playgrounds repaired with recovered funds. Sarah often reflected on how different things could have been. "We could have signed her covenant," she'd say, "but she'd still be stealing, intimidating, destroying trust." By resisting, our neighborhood not only exposed corruption, but helped federal investigators protect dozens of other communities. Federal interest remained strong. Agent Davies consulted Sarah about fraud patterns, her documentation now training investigators nationwide. At one barbecue, a woman quietly introduced herself. "I'm Detective Hayes. My mother lives in Highland Oaks, that HOA you helped investigate." She handed Sarah a card. "We found something in Victoria's sister's house, something that connects to your neighborhood." The conversation confirmed Margaret Sterling had kept detailed records on potential fraud targets across the Southwest. Our community was part of a much larger project, identifying HOAs with weak oversight and aging leadership. The Sterling family wasn't just running a regional embezzlement scheme. They developed a systematic plan for nationwide expansion, treating HOA fraud like a business enterprise. The most disturbing discovery: Our neighborhood wasn't chosen at random. Sarah's federal contractor background made us a deliberate target, a testing ground to see if their methods could withstand professional scrutiny. As Detective Hayes shared these revelations, I realized our suburban drama had been part of something far larger and more dangerous. The clipboard-wielding president, who terrorized us, had been running field research for a network that could have victimized thousands. By resisting, we accidentally prevented a massive expansion of organized fraud. That night, children played safely, families laughed, and neighbors planned improvements. Then Detective Hayes approached Sarah. I'm Detective Hayes. My mother lives in Highland Oaks. The HOA you helped investigate. We found something in Victoria's sister's house. Something that connects to your neighborhood. And that's how one HOA Karen's fake authority sparked a federal investigation that protected communities nationwide. If this story of military precision versus suburban corruption kept you hooked, smash that like button. I'm your host at Echo Stories, and I'll see you in the next incredible tale of justice served. Until then, stay strong, and never back down from doing what's right.